This is a reading of the Christmas Conference for the foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923 to 1924, Part 15, entitled Open Discussion of Swiss Delegates, under the Chairmanship of Rudolf Steiner, occurred on the 31st of December at 2:30 in the afternoon. At 2:30 in the afternoon of 31 December, a meeting of the Swiss Anthroposophical Society took place in the architect's office. Herr Eppley had called this meeting and had asked Dr. Steiner to be present and take the chair. Members of the Vorstand of the General Anthroposophical Society present are Dr. Steiner, Albert Steffen, Fräulein Frede, Dr. Wachsmuth, later also Frau Dr. Steiner. Herr Eppley greets Dr. Steiner and requests him to take the chair. Dr. Steiner opens the meeting, called for the purpose of a free discussion at the request of the delegates of the Anthroposophical Society in Switzerland. I thank Herr Eppley most warmly for his kind words. Now, let us begin the meeting. Who would like to make a contribution to this open discussion? Would anyone wishing to speak please do so? Frau Professor Bürgi, Bern, requests Dr. Steiner to become the chairman of the Swiss Anthroposophical Society. Dr. Steiner: I am somewhat surprised by Frau Professor Bürgi's suggestion, for, at least in the long run, we cannot very well depart from the stipulation of the incompatibility of the offices of the Central Vorstand with other offices. Thus, I too would not be able to take on any other position in some part of the Anthroposophical Society in the long run. But quite apart from that, if we are to enter into a provisional arrangement for the time being, would not Herr Steffen be a better choice as General Secretary for Switzerland? It seems to me that if we are going to enter into a provisional situation, then Herr Steffen would be the right person. Of course, it is entirely up to you to have a discussion about it, but it seems rather a problem, or indeed senseless, for me to assume the position of chairman of the Swiss Society when the only reason preventing Herr Steffen is the fact that he is a member of the Central Vorstand. I am in the very same position. Perhaps you would speak further on this. Herr Steffen: I would want to decline. It does not seem to be fitting. Dr. Steiner: But my dear Herr Steffen, why not? Since it is to be provisional, I cannot see why not. But perhaps there is another way of getting out of this fix. Perhaps we can achieve both ends, dear friends, bringing about a Swiss leadership for the Swiss Anthroposophical Society, and arising out of the local situation, creating a close link with the Central Anthroposophical Society. Or ought it not to be possible for there to be a close link between the Central Anthroposophical Society, which has its seat here in Switzerland, and the Swiss Anthroposophical Society? Perhaps we can get out of this fix by seeing to it that we, in principle, maintain the incompatibility, while you express it by choosing a kind of General Secretary apart from us, yet at the same time confer on both of us the chairmanship as members of the Vorstand of the Central Anthroposophical Society. It would then be that the Swiss Society comes to the resolution, arising out of this meeting of its delegates, that it is an obvious thing for the Central Vorstand to be regarded also as the head of the Swiss Anthroposophical Society, and the Swiss Anthroposophical Society then appoints an acting General Secretary. If we were to do it like this, it would not have to be provisional, for it would be an expression of the very best of all situations. The Swiss members have no fear for their independence, in that they simply take into their bosom the whole of the Anthroposophical Society. This is how I think we could solve this problem. Herr Steffen and I together will take on the chairmanship in our capacity as presidents of the Anthroposophical Society. Dr. Hugentobler: Truly we could not have come up with a better solution. Dr. Steiner: Would anyone else like to speak? Herr Keller suggests that the choice of General Secretary be left to the Vorstand. Dr. Steiner. It is, of course, rather difficult for the Vorstand to make this choice if the matter is not discussed first. I am sure I am not giving away esoteric secrets by saying that it is extremely difficult to discover which individual is so popular all over Switzerland as to be generally accepted as the administrator. Perhaps a little discussion on the matter might contribute to achieving a result. The office will then be exercised in close contact with Herr Steffen and myself. And then what Frau Professor Bürgi said would probably no longer apply in the way it would have done had an independent General Secretary been chosen. What she said was that the Swiss society was in an exposed position through being so close to the Goetheanum, and so on, and that, therefore, it would be important for the office to be exercised in a suitable manner. But now, since you have been so good as to choose us to take on this office, these arguments may not apply quite so sharply any longer. I rather think that now the person's popularity will be all that matters. But would anyone else like to say something? Dr. Grossheins believes that it is perhaps not necessary to have a General Secretary in addition to the present Vorstand. Dr. Steiner. Would not people prefer that a person be nominated by the meeting so that the various administrative tasks can be better carried out? Surely people would prefer this. I would like to hear what people think. Edgar Dürler. We of the New Generation branch suggest Dr. Oskar Grossheins. Dr. Steiner. Dr. Oskar Grossheins has been suggested. Are there any other suggestions? Herr Tutt would like further clarification of the duties incumbent on this person. Dr. Steiner. Now that we are making a new beginning, should we not start afresh with new arrangements and disregard the old ones? Could we not give up the old ways and reorganize things, starting from the roots? From an objective point of view, I don't think there is anything against the Swiss Anthroposophical Society being constituted in such a way that its main representation lies with the General Anthroposophical Society in the way we have just decided. However, on the level of feelings, I do want to avoid a sense, possibly arising later on, that the Swiss Anthroposophical Society is being patronized in any way or treated as a second-rate child. In actual fact, this would not be possible, for by embracing it in the first place, it is shown to be a first-rate child. This would indeed have to be the case. But, nevertheless, a hint of a feeling could arise somewhere that the Swiss society is only an appendage of the General Anthroposophical Society. Tact also has a part to play in this, and in practice I don't think it would happen. But if anyone here does have a hint of any such feeling in his heart, then please do express it now, so that we can really come to a conclusion on this matter. Otherwise it would probably be best, with regard to Switzerland, simply to make allowances for the old ways to which people are so attached, and to carry out the general administration ourselves. In this case, Herr Tutt's suggestion would be the right one, simply to let the Swiss Anthroposophical Society be administered along with the General Anthroposophical Society, and for any constitutional matters having a substantial inner significance for the society, we would then call a meeting of whatever representatives the different branches wished to send. By doing this from time to time, we would be expressing what people have become so attached to in Switzerland, namely the democratic element. I think that would then be the best way to get on. We would always call on the individual members. This would be possible in Switzerland because it is such a small country, but it would not be possible in any other national society. It would also not be necessary for these meetings to take place always at the Goetheanum. They could be in different places, since it is so easy to get everywhere. In fact, it would be quite a good thing if these meetings of members were what are usually called wandering meetings. Having meetings from time to time in Bern, Zurich, Olten, and so on, always combined presumably with one of my lectures, would be the best way of managing our affairs in Switzerland. Herr Tutt. It was not my intention to cling to this old organization at all costs. I merely wanted clarity about which aspects would remain and which would not, so as to be as clear as possible about how the things that are still in question would work. Dr. Steiner: in that case, I would consider that Herr Tut, and probably most of you here, would prefer it if the representation of the Swiss Society were carried out here by the General Anthroposophical Society. Routine matters can easily be attended to by the administration, and no special secretary would be needed for this. And then, in order to keep in contact with the different parts of Switzerland, it would be best if we could nominate as an advisory group for the Vorstand here 3, 4, or 5 men and women who would be trustees, to whom we could turn when necessary, and with whom we could hold the wandering meetings. These would not have to be so very frequent, but the group of trustees would give us contact with the different parts of Switzerland. Perhaps this is what people would like? Herr Storer: if this were to be the case, then of course the new generation group would withdraw its suggestion. Dr. Steiner: would anyone else like to speak? Dr. Usteri asks a question. Dr. Steiner: your question refers to the program, but this is a matter of the agenda each day. You said that you arrived this morning and found the meeting in the hall was not what you expected. Was it not? Well, you see, we have had to depart from the program because it was not possible in the plenary gathering to speak in depth about all the questions that need discussing, unless we had constantly adjourned the meetings and had a running agenda for the members' meetings. That is why I myself departed in the daily agendas from the original program. But the agenda for the following day has always been announced in detail the day before. Thus, the meeting of doctors in question took place this morning. What a pity that you did not have a chance to ask someone who was here yesterday. Any member would have been able to tell you that there was going to be a meeting of practicing doctors in the glass house at 8:30 this morning. For you see, we wanted to make this particular Christmas conference as fruitful as possible and do as much as we could to prevent everything from being watered down in general discussion. That is why medical matters were to be discussed among practicing doctors only. So they were removed from the general meeting and are to be dealt with in 3 meetings, of which the first took place this morning at 8:30, the second tomorrow, and the third probably also. The time is yet to be announced. Thus, the things announced in the program are in fact being dealt with in an even better way than had originally been made known. A general discussion amongst all the members would not have led to any better outcome. I have even made sure that all the meetings which do not concern all members, but only particular groups, have also been announced in the general meeting, so that those not concerned with a particular meeting nevertheless know that it is taking place. That you did not find this out was probably due to the fact that you did not arrive before 8:30, when you would have had an opportunity to ask someone. I don't think a general secretary would have been able to inform you any better than any of the members if you had got there this morning. In Haus Friedwacht, you could have obtained exact information. But of course, there could also be very good reasons for nominating a general secretary. This is something we could discuss further. There was no vote about it, but I should like to take a vote on this. Would those friends who are in favor of Albert Steffen and myself continuing as chairman of the Swiss Anthroposophical Society please raise their hands? They do. Would those who are against also please raise their hands? Nobody does. So, the suggestion has been adopted. Now it is a question of whether we decide to let the administrative office of the General Anthroposophical Society take over the routine administration of the Swiss Anthroposophical Society, and whether we set up a group of elders, or for that matter, younger people, to whom we can turn from time to time when necessary or when something has to be decided. Dr. Usteri supports this suggestion. Herr Gehring supports Dr. Usteri. Herr Tut asks whether representation by a general secretary would not be more advantageous than that by the representatives of the groups. Dr. Steiner: I think it would be best if the individual branches were to suggest their delegates to us. The group of delegates can be as large as the number of branches that exist. The disadvantage hitherto has been that the group of representatives of the branches has at the same time been seen as the council. A council like this is no good for anything. But here, perhaps I am boasting, but this is what we intend, if the administration is firmly taken in hand by the leadership of the Anthroposophical Society, then it will be up to this leadership to take the initiative and call the delegates of the branches together for a meeting. In such a case, a rather large group of delegates would probably not pose any particular difficulty. So I think it would be quite manageable for every single branch to nominate a representative for this circle. This seems to me will be the best way. But if any branches wanted to join together to send a delegate, that would also be possible. But it is not necessary for this to be done today. It would perhaps be better to have a thorough discussion in the branches themselves and let us know who has been chosen sometime during the next 2 or 3 weeks. Then our administration will be entirely democratic, which is much favored in Switzerland. Now I would like to ask whether there is anything else you wish to bring up. I cannot imagine that you do not also have other wishes, urges, longings on your mind. Herr Epley would like to know whether the question of the administration has now been settled. Dr. Steiner: the meetings would take place anyway, and as for the purely administrative matters, they would be reported to this group, so that the administration would be relieved of the responsibility if the council would accept the responsibility. Would anyone else like to speak? Dr. Usteri: now that there has been such applause, I presume that a formal vote on the 2 points is not necessary. Dr. Steiner: actually, I would ask you to vote once there is no one else who wishes to speak. Now, does anyone else wish to speak on the matter of this group, or on what I have said about the group relieving the administration? Herr Storer: I would like to suggest that the small branches send 1 and the larger branches 2 delegates. But then we should have to define what we mean by large and small. Herr Trindler says that what matters is not whether there are 1 or 2, but that they are the right people. Dr. Steiner: would anyone else like to say something about this? So, are you making this proposal? The proposal is that the small groups send 1 and the larger groups 2 delegates. Herr Trindler says something inaudible. Dr. Steiner: the 2 proposals are in agreement with one another. They are not contradictory, but we shall have to define larger and smaller. So what is a large and what is a small group? Herr Storer: looking at the Swiss branches, I would say that the large ones are those at the Goetheanum, in Bern, in Basel, in Zurich, and in St. Gallen. Dr. Steiner: but you could imagine that a branch which is small today might grow large later on. We do need a figure to tell us when a group is starting to become a large one. Herr Storer: a small group has not more than 10 members. Dr. Steiner: so 10 and less is a small branch, 11 and over a large branch. Herr Trindler: a branch with as many as 100 members does not necessarily achieve any more than a small one. Herr Tut: it is not a matter of what the branch achieves. Perhaps 40 or 50 could be the number determining a large group. Herr Schweigler asks how he should understand the matter of deciding about the delegates. Would this be by a vote, or simply by acclaim? Which is best? Dr. Steiner: the situation varies from one country to another. You will have heard that in England I suggested that the selection of representatives be made not according to branches, but according to whatever figure is arrived at by dividing the total English membership by 7. I think this would be a very good method for England, but it would not be good to apply this way of thinking to Switzerland. Here I think we should aim in this group for 2 delegates from branches with over 50 members and 1 from those with fewer than 50 members. Apart from this, the difference is not particularly important. I think that would be best in this case. A branch with 10 members can perhaps work better than a branch with 200 members, certainly. But that applies to all forms of democratic representation, and I do not believe that you can base any particular rule on this. Otherwise you would have to say, those branches which work well send 2 representatives, and those which work badly send 1. But this would be rather difficult to determine, and a branch which does not work well will certainly not believe such a thing of itself. And there is laughter. Dr. Hugentobler: I don't think Herr Schweigler realizes that there are things about which you cannot vote. Herr Schweigler denies this. Dr. Hugentobler answers, and it's inaudible. Dr. Steiner: So if I have understood this correctly, then the proposal regarding the groups of delegates is as follows. Firstly, the group of delegates is instituted, and secondly, branches of over 50 members send 2 representatives, and branches of under 50 members send 1. A man asks, are the branch leaders not the people best suited? Dr. Steiner: But the branch leaders are not decided by the meeting of delegates, but by the branches themselves. It has nothing to do with whoever might be the branch leader at the moment. A man: But, and then it's inaudible. Herr Gering Christ: That is a misunderstanding on the part of this gentleman. Dr. Steiner: The initiative has to lie with somebody. And now the initiative will lie with us here in Dornach, and we shall be supported by the delegates. The meeting of delegates will be a kind of control body. It does not have to work as a council. A difficulty only arises if there is a council scattered all over the place that never does anything. That is where the difficulty lies. Dr. Usteri: Have we accepted Dr. Hugentobler's proposal that there should be a vote? Dr. Steiner: It has been proposed that there should be a vote. Very well. Dr. Hugentobler's suggestion was the most far-reaching, namely that the branches choose their own delegates and let us know in due course, whereby branches of over 50 members will send 2, and those with fewer than 50 will send 1. Does anyone want me to divide this proposal into 2 parts? If that is not the case, then I now propose the vote for both the questions and ask those in favor to raise their hands. Who is against? The proposal seems to have been adopted. So, now the whole of the administration and leadership of the society in Switzerland has been constituted. Does anyone else wish to speak about a matter that concerns the Swiss society? Herr Stockar: I would like to ask the present chairman, Dr. Steiner, for his opinion on whether the Swiss society should now come to grips with the statutes. As stated in the statutes, it is now up to us to discuss the statutes and work out a suitable form for our national society, perhaps by adding to the general statutes. Dr. Steiner: That will of course be the subject of the first meeting of delegates, and it will be our task, as the Council of the Swiss Society, to work out a draft. On the basis of this draft, the first meeting of delegates will be able to discuss with us how we adopt the draft statutes, or else modify them, or whatever. This will surely be in order on the basis of the decisions made today. Herr Stockar has another question. When there are official public announcements to be made, will they be made from here, or will the representatives in the different towns be expected to make them? Dr. Steiner: First of all, there will be an official report in the first supplement to titled Das Goetheanum, and apart from this official report, a good number of friends have been present and experienced it all for themselves. They will pass on anything they consider important. That is how I see it. As I see it, people are actually obliged to speak within the circle of the society about what they have experienced here, and they could also speak about it wherever else they like, in a tactful way, such as is appropriate when speaking in public. Dr. Hugentobler wants the links with Dornach to be better. Herr Gering Christ: Will nothing be made public? Dr. Steiner: Let me repeat what I have just said. Members should feel obliged to speak amongst the members about whatever they have experienced, about whatever they have experienced. but they should also feel in duty bound to bring these things out into the world in, shall I say, a tactful manner. And I include the press in this. It will be possible to do it in a suitable way, and we shall make sure that it is done in a suitable way. Indeed, I should like to say anyway, and as far as I know the whole Vorstand, which I have been so very instrumental in bringing into being, supports this, that I count courtesy as something that ought to exist extensively within our society. We need courtesy. Some of us regard it as the most terrible thing that could have happened, that one of our most valued members in Switzerland has been lost to us. He was a member of the Goetheanum committee, and one of the reasons he was able to give was that he once entered the Goetheanum as a member of the committee and was then thrown out. There have been many such examples of discourtesies. We shall very urgently have to make it our task that courtesy is not the least of the unwritten paragraphs of our statutes. We shall have to make very, very strenuous efforts in this direction. I presume that what Dr. Hugentobler meant encompassed a good deal of this. It was no small task for the Provisional Vorstand to give quarters for all the many people who have come here, and some are indeed lodged in the most primitive and dreadful quarters. Yet they managed. But that does not make the work any less. In addition to all this, please be patient for a few more moments. We shall have to succeed gradually in being truly courteous in every way, both toward Switzerland and toward the outside in general. One speaker says that people could be more observant and take more into account. Yesterday evening someone had arrived in Dornach who had lost his membership card 2 or 3 years ago. Every seat was occupied, and it was impossible to find one anywhere, and so on. Dr. Steiner: in that particular case, it would not have helped if the Swiss Society had had a representative or a council, since it was a meeting of the General Anthroposophical Society. We should have been delighted if only you had come up to our table at the front. This is the very reason why I made sure that the Vorstand should be visible right from the start. They will be visible at every future meeting, and I hope, knowing the Vorstand as I do, that they will also be courteous in future. So please be so good as to turn to the Vorstand during this conference, and things should be all right. Are there any more questions? General reply, no. Dr. Steiner: it seems to me that we have more or less reached the end of our agenda, and as far as the question of courtesy is concerned, let us rather carry it out in practice. I think we can now close this meeting. Please permit me to close the meeting. That's the end of part 15. This is a reading of the Christmas Conference for the Foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923 to 1924. This is part 16, a lecture given by Rudolf Steiner entitled The Envy of the Gods, the Envy of Human Beings, looking back to the burning of the Goetheanum on New Year's Eve, 1922-23, 1 year earlier. Lecture by Rudolf Steiner, given on the 31st of December at 8:30 in the evening. My dear friends, we stand today under the sign of a grievous memory, and we shall by all means place what is to be the content of today's lecture within the sign of this grievous memory. Those of you who were present then will remember how the lecture I was permitted to give just a year ago in our former building followed a path that led from the description of earthly natural conditions upward into the spiritual worlds, and into the revelation of these spiritual worlds out of the starry script. You will remember how it was possible then to link the human heart, the soul of man, the human spirit, and all that belongs to it, with all that can be discovered on the path outward, into not only the wide realm of the stars, but also into what depicts the world of the spirit through the wide realm of the stars, like a cosmic script. The last thing I was permitted to write down on the blackboard in that hall, which was taken from us so soon afterward, that last thing was intended to raise the human soul up into spiritual heights. On that very evening the link was made with that to which our Goetheanum building was to be dedicated in its whole being. So, now, as though in a continuation of that lecture, given here a year ago, let me begin by speaking about that to which the link was then made. If, in the times before the burning of Ephesus, men spoke about the mysteries, then those who in their heart and soul understood something of the nature of the mysteries said, in essence, human knowledge, human wisdom has an abode, a dwelling place in the mysteries. And if in those olden times there was talk of the mysteries among the spiritual leaders of the world, that is, if there was talk in supersensible realms about the mysteries, allow me to use these expressions, even though they describe only figuratively how thoughts are sent down from the supersensible realms, and how the supersensible works in the sense-perceptible realm. If in supersensible realms there was talk about the mysteries, then what was said went, in essence, like this. In the mysteries, human beings set up an abode, where we gods can find those human beings, who bring us offerings, and who understand us in their act of offering. For indeed, those who knew about such things in the ancient world were generally aware that in the mystery centers gods and human beings encountered one another, and that all that carries and maintains the world depends on what takes place in the mysteries between gods and human beings. But there are words which have even come down to us in external history. These words, handed down through history, can deeply move our human hearts, especially when they can be seen taking shape out of very special events, when the shape they take is formed as though in letters of bronze, visible in spirit only for a moment, and written into the history of humankind. Such words are always seen when one looks in spirit toward the deed of Herostratus, the burning of the temple at Ephesus. In the flames, the ancient words stand out: the envy of the gods. Among the manifold words that have come down to us from olden times, which can be seen in the life of those times in the manner I have described, I do believe that this is one of the most terrible to be found in the physical world: the envy of the gods. In those olden times, the word God was used to describe anything that lived as a supersensible being without ever needing to appear on earth in a physical body. And in those times, people distinguished between many and varied races of gods. But those divine spiritual beings who are so closely linked with mankind that the human being in his inmost nature has come into existence through them and has been sent by them on his journey through the ages, those beings we sense in the majesty and in the minutest appearances of outer nature, those divine spiritual beings cannot become envious. Yet in olden times the envy of the gods denoted something very real. Following the human race in its development up to about the time of Ephesus, we find that indeed the more advanced human individuals had taken for themselves much of what the good gods had been glad to give them in the mysteries. It is quite right to say that an intimate relationship exists between the good human hearts and the good gods, a relationship made ever more close in the mysteries. Thus, the realization came about in the souls of certain other Luciferic and Ahrimanic godly beings that human beings were being drawn ever closer to the good gods, and thus arose the envy of the gods toward man, Again and again we hear in history that a human being, striving for the spirit, if he meets with a tragic destiny, is described as having been a victim of the envy of the gods. The ancient Greeks knew of this envy of the gods, and they traced much of what took place in external human evolution back to this envy of the gods. The burning of the temple at Ephesus made it obvious that a certain further spiritual development of mankind is only possible if human beings realize that there are gods, that is, supersensible beings who are envious of the further progress of humankind. This has colored the whole of history since the burning of the temple at Ephesus, or I could say since the birth of Alexander. And a proper conception of the mystery of Golgotha, too, must take into account that we look into a world that is filled with the envy of certain races of gods. From soon after the Persian Wars, the atmosphere of soul in Greece had been filled with the consequences of this envy of the gods. And what was then accomplished at the time of Macedonia had to be carried out in full awareness of the envy of the gods reigning over the face of the earth in the spiritual atmosphere. Yet it was carried out courageously, boldly, in defiance of misunderstandings on the part of both gods and men. And there came down into this atmosphere, filled with the envy of the gods, the deed of that God who is capable of the greatest love that can possibly exist in the world. We see the mystery of Golgotha in its true light only if we can add to everything else also the image of the clouds in the ancient world, in Hellas, Macedonia, the Near East, North Africa, Southern Europe, the image of those clouds that are an expression of the envy of the gods. Wondrously warming, gently gleaming, there falls into this cloud-filled atmosphere the love that streams through the mystery of Golgotha. This interaction was, if I may describe it thus, a matter which at that time took place between gods and human beings. Now, in our time, in the age of human freedom, it is something that has to take place down below, here in physical human life. And the manner in which it takes place can indeed be described. In olden times, down on the earth, one thought of the mysteries thus: human knowledge, human wisdom finds an abode in the mysteries. But among the gods it was said, when we descend into the mysteries, we find there the offerings of human beings, and in the human being who makes his offering we are comprehended. The burning of the temple at Ephesus marked the beginning of the age in which the mysteries, in their old form, gradually began to disappear. I have told you how they continued to endure here and there, sublimely, for example, in the mysteries of Hibernia, where the mystery of Golgotha was celebrated in the divine cultus, simultaneously with the actual physical event over in Palestine. They knew of it solely through the spiritual communication that existed between Palestine and Hibernia. There was no physical communication. Nevertheless, in the physical world, the mysteries receded more and more. The external abodes, which were places of encounter between gods and human beings, increasingly lost their significance. By the 13th and 14th centuries, they had lost it almost entirely. Those who wanted to find the way, for example, to the Holy Grail, had to know how to follow spiritual paths. In olden times, before the burning of the temple at Ephesus, the paths to be trodden were physical paths. In the Middle Ages, the paths were spiritual. In particular, a spiritual path had to be followed by one who sought instruction in the truly Rosicrucian way from the 13th or 14th century onward, but even more so from the 15th century. The temples of the Rosicrucians were profoundly hidden from any external physical experience. Many true Rosicrucians frequented the temples, but these temples could not be found by any external physical human eye. But it was possible for pupils to find these aged Rosicrucians, who lived here or there like hermits of wisdom, hermits of the holy human deed. They could be found by those who could comprehend the language of the gods, speaking out of gently shining eyes. I am not talking figuratively. I do not want to speak in pictures. I am telling you of an actual reality, which was extremely significant at the time to which I am pointing. The pupils found their Rosicrucian teacher if they had first gained the capacity to understand the language of the heavens, speaking out of gently shining physical eyes. In the 14th and 15th centuries in Central Europe, these remarkable personalities were to be found living in the most modest surroundings, in the most unassuming human accommodation. They were filled with the divine spirit. In their inner being they were linked to the spiritual temples which existed, but to which access was truly as difficult to find as was that to the Holy Grail described in the well-known legend. Looking at what took place between one of these Rosicrucian teachers and his pupil, we can overhear many a conversation that describes, in the form appropriate for more recent times, the divine wisdom as it exists on the earth. The instruction was profoundly concrete. A Rosicrucian teacher was discovered in his solitude by a pupil who had enthusiastically endeavored to seek and find him. A pupil gazed into the gently shining eyes out of which flows the speech of gods, and modestly he received something like the following instruction: "Look, my son, at your own being. You bear with you that body which your external physical eyes can see. The very center of the earth sends to this body the forces which make it visible. This is your physical body. But look around you at your own environment on the earth. You see stones. They are permitted to exist on the earth. Their dwelling place is on the earth. Once they have taken on a shape, they can maintain it through the forces of the earth. Look at the crystal. It bears a form, and through the earth it retains this form of its own nature. Your physical body is incapable of this. If your soul departs from it, then the earth destroys it. It dissolves it into dust. The earth has no power over your physical body. It has the power to shape and to maintain the transparent, wonderfully formed shapes of the crystal. But it has no power to maintain the shape of your physical body. It has to dissolve it into dust. Your physical body is not of this earth. Your physical body is of supreme spirituality. To seraphim, cherubim, and thrones belong the form and shape of your physical body. Your physical body does not belong to the earth. It belongs to those spiritual forces which are the highest as yet accessible to you. The earth can destroy it, but never build it up. And within this, your physical body, lives your etheric body. The day will come when your physical body is taken in by the earth in order to be destroyed. Then your etheric body will dissolve into the widths of the cosmos. The widths of the cosmos can dissolve this etheric body, but they cannot build it up. Only those divine spiritual beings belonging to the hierarchy of the dynamis, exousiae, and karyotetes can build it up. You unite with your physical body the physical substances of the earth. But that which is in you transforms the physical substances of the earth in such a way that within them there is no longer anything resembling whatever is physical in the environment of your physical body. Your etheric body moves everything in you that is liquid or watery. The juices that stream and circulate are under the influence of your etheric body. See your blood. Exousiae, dunamis, Kyriatetes. Cause this blood as a liquid to circulate through your arteries. You are human only in your physical body. In your etheric body you are still animal, but an animal inspirited by the second hierarchy. What I have been saying to you, compressed into a few words, was the subject of long instruction by that teacher in whose gently shining eyes the pupil heard the speech of heaven. Then the attention of the pupil was drawn to the third member of the human being, which we call the astral body. The pupil was shown how this astral body contains the impulse to breathe and to be involved with everything that is aeriform in the human organism, with everything that pulses as air through the human organism. The earthly realm may endeavor, for ages after the human being has stepped through the portal of death, to rumble about in the aeriform realm. For years, the clairvoyant eye can discern the astral bodies of those who have died rumbling about in the atmospheric phenomena of the earth. Yet the earthly realm, with all its environment, is incapable of doing anything to the impulses of the astral body except dissolve them. The beings of the third hierarchy, archai, archangeloi, angeloi, alone can form it. Thus, deeply moving the heart of his pupil, the teacher said, in your physical body, by taking in and transforming the mineral kingdom, by taking in the human realm and working on it, you belong to seraphim, cherubim, thrones. Insofar as you are an etheric body, you are animal-like in the etheric realm, but you belong to the spirits called the spirits of the second hierarchy, Kyriatetes, dunamis, exousiae. Insofar as you weave in the fluid element, you do not belong to the earth, but to this hierarchy. And by weaving in the aeriform element, you do not belong to the earth, but to the hierarchy of angeloi, archangeloi, archai. Having undergone sufficient instruction in this way, the pupil no longer felt related to the earth. Going out, he sensed from his physical, etheric, and astral bodies were the forces that joined him through the mineral world with the first hierarchy, through the watery earth with the second hierarchy, and through the encircling air with the third hierarchy. It was clear to him that he lives on the earth solely through the element of warmth, which he bears within him. Thus the Rosicrucian pupil felt the warmth he bears within him, the physical warmth, to be what is actually the earthly human element in him. And he learned increasingly to feel that this physical warmth is related to warmth of soul and warmth of spirit. Human beings living in later times have increasingly forgotten how their physical content, their etheric content, and their astral content is related to the divine world through the solid element, the fluid element, and the aeriform element. But the Rosicrucian pupil knew this full well. He knew that the warmth element is that which is truly earthly and human. At the moment when the pupil of the Rosicrucian master realized this mystery of the connection between the element of warmth and the human earthly element, he knew how to link his human element with the spiritual world. Before entering those often quite unassuming dwellings inhabited by such Rosicrucian teachers, the pupils were shown, usually without their seeking it, and in a seemingly miraculous manner, the one in this way and the other in another way, often coincidentally, so outwardly it seemed, that they were shown that they must seek to link their own spirit with the spirit of the cosmos. And when the pupil had received from his teacher the instruction about which I have just been speaking, then he could say to his teacher, I now depart from you, having received the greatest consolation possible on earth, by showing me that warmth is truly the element of earthly man. You have enabled me to link my physical aspect with the realm of soul and spirit. I take the soul element not into my solid bones, not into my liquid blood, not into my airy breath, but into my element of warmth. In utmost peace, those who had received such instruction departed in those days from their teachers. And out of the peace in their countenance, which expressed the outcome of that great consolation, out of the peace in their countenance, there developed gradually that gentle glance through which the speech of heaven can resound. Thus profound instruction in the realm of the soul was available right into the first third of the 15th century, hidden away from those events of which external history tells us. An instruction took place which encompassed the total human being, an instruction that permitted the human soul to link its own being with the sphere of the cosmos and of the spirit. This spiritual mood has entirely drained away during the course of the last few centuries. It no longer belongs to our civilization. A superficial civilization, estranged from the gods, has spread itself over what were once the dwelling places that saw what I have just described to you. Here one stands today with the memory, which can only be called up in the light of the astral world, of many a scene resembling the one I have described. Hence our basic mood when we first look back to those ages that are often described as being so dark, and then look out into our present time. But when we look back in this way, our heart is stirred through the spiritual revelations that can once more be received by mankind since the final third of the 19th century, by a deep longing to speak in a spiritual way once more to human beings. And this spiritual way of speaking is not dependent on abstract words alone. It calls for all manner of signs in order to be all-embracing, and a language needed for those spiritual beings who are to speak to modern mankind. Such a way of speaking existed indeed in the forms of our Goetheanum, burnt down a year ago. Truly, these forms were to have spoken out into the world, the ideas told to the audience from the platform. Thus, in a certain way, the Goetheanum was something that could, in an entirely new form, remind us of something ancient. When the one approaching initiation entered into the temple at Ephesus, his glance was drawn to that statue about which I have spoken during these days, that statue which called to him in words of the heart, "Unite with the world ether, and you shall see the earthly realm from etheric heights." Thus did many a pupil at Ephesus view the earthly realm from etheric heights. And a certain race of gods grew envious. But centuries before the mystery of Golgotha, courageous human beings nevertheless found ways, despite the envy of the gods, to carry forward, weakly perhaps, but not so weakly that it remained without effect, that which had worked since the days of ancient and holy human evolution, right up to the time of the burning of the temple. And if our Goetheanum could have been finally completed, then, once again, as we entered from the west, our glance would have fallen on that statue, which would have challenged the human being to know himself as a cosmic being placed between the forces of Lucifer and the forces of Ahriman, with the inward, divinely sustained equilibrium of his being. And when our glance fell on the forms of the pillars, the architraves, they spoke a language that was a continuation of what was expressed from the platform in the ideas which worked as though interpreting the Spirit. The words continued to resound along the sculpted forms, and up above in the dome were scenes to be seen, scenes which brought human evolution closer to spiritual sight. in this Goetheanum there was, indeed, for those who had a feeling for it, a memory of the temple at Ephesus. But that memory grew terribly painful when the burning torch was applied to this very Goetheanum in a manner that was not at all dissimilar to ancient times, not at all dissimilar, especially as regards the moment of evolution, in which the Goetheanum was, of itself, to have become the bearer of a renewal of spiritual life. My dear friends, our pain was profound. Our pain was inexpressible. But we formed the resolve to continue our work for the spiritual world, unhindered by the most sorrowful and most tragic events that could possibly have come upon us. For in our heart of hearts, we could say that in the flames rising up from Ephesus was written the envy of the gods, at a time when human beings still had to follow, rather more without freedom, the will of good or evil gods. In our day, human beings are organized more toward freedom, and a year ago, in the night of New Year's Eve, we saw before us the devouring flames. The red blaze shot skyward. Dark, bluish, reddish-yellow lines of flame curled through the seething sea of fire, generated by the metal instruments contained in the Goetheanum, a gigantic sea of flame containing the most varied shades and colors. And gazing into this sea of flame, with the colored lines darting hither and thither, one could not but read words which spoke to the pain in one's soul, the envy of human beings. Thus, what speaks from epoch to epoch in human evolution comes together, link by link, even in the greatest of misfortunes. An unbroken thread runs from the words that give expression to the greatest misfortune, at a time when human beings still looked up to the gods without freedom, a time when they ought to have been making themselves free of this unfreedom. An unbroken thread of spiritual evolution runs from that misfortune which bore inscribed in the flames the words about the envy of the gods. This unbroken thread runs right through to our own misfortune, in a time when human beings ought to be finding the strength for freedom, a misfortune in which the flames bore the inscription, the envy of human beings. In Ephesus, the statue of the goddess; here in the Goetheanum, the statue of the human being, the statue of the representative of man, Christ Jesus, into whom, identifying ourselves with him in all humility, we thought to merge in knowledge, just as in olden times, in their own way, no longer quite comprehensible to mankind today, the pupils of Ephesus merged into Diana of Ephesus. We do not lessen our pain by viewing in the light of history what took place on New Year's Eve last year, when I was permitted to stand for the last time on that platform that had been set up in harmony with the whole of the building. The intention had been to guide the eyes of the listeners, to guide the eyes of their souls toward the ascent from earthly realms into starry realms that express the will and the wisdom, the light of the spiritual cosmos. Many of the spirits who taught their pupils in the Middle Ages in the manner described just now stood, I know, as godparents at that moment. And an hour after the last word had been spoken, I was called to the burning Goetheanum. We spent the night of New Year's Eve last year watching the Goetheanum burning. The mere utterance of these words, dear friends, conjures up an inexpressible response in all our hearts, in all our souls. When something like this has swept across a hallowed place in human evolution, there have always been a few who have vowed to work on in the spirit, devoted to what had once been physical, even though whatever it had been was no longer present. And gathered now, as we are, on the anniversary of that misfortune of the Goetheanum, let us be aware that our souls will be living in the proper mood for this, our gathering, if we all vow to carry on in spirit, through this wave of progress in human evolution, that which was present in physical form, as a physical image and a physical shape in the Goetheanum, visible to our physical eyes, before being snatched away from our physical perception by a Herostratus deed. Our pain attaches itself to the old Goetheanum. We shall only become worthy of having been permitted to build that Goetheanum if today, in remembering it, we vow before whatever is best and most divine in each one of our souls to keep faith with the spiritual impulses that had been given an outer form in that Goetheanum. It was possible for this Goetheanum to be taken from us. The spirit of this Goetheanum, if our will is truly upright and honest, cannot be taken from us. And least of all will it be taken from us if at this solemn and festive hour, separated by so short a time from the moment a year ago when the flames leapt up from our beloved Goetheanum, if at this moment we not only feel the pain anew, but also vow out of this pain to keep faith with that Spirit, for whom over 10 long years we were permitted to build this abode. Then, my dear friends, when this inner vow flows from our heart in all honesty and uprightness, when we can transform the pain and suffering into the impulse for doing deeds, then shall we transform the sorrowful event into a blessing. The pain cannot diminish because of this, but it behooves us to find out of this very pain the incentive to act, the incentive to do deeds in the Spirit. And so, my dear friends, let us look back to the terrible flames of fire which filled us with such inexpressible sorrow. But let us also, in making that vow before whatever forces are the best and most divine in each of us, feel the holy flame in our hearts, the flame which is to enlighten and warm that which was willed in the Goetheanum, by bearing this will onward through the waves of progress in human evolution. So now, more profoundly, we repeat those words which I was permitted to speak over there a year ago, almost at this very moment. I said, in essence, we are living on the eve of a new year. New year. Let us live toward a new cosmic year. If only the Goetheanum still stood amongst us, we could renew this exhortation at this moment. It no longer stands amongst us. Yet I believe that just because it no longer stands amongst us, we are permitted on this eve of another new year to renew this exhortation with a force increased many times over. Let us bear the soul of the Goetheanum over into the new cosmic year, and let us endeavor to build in the new Goetheanum a worthy monument to the body of the old Goetheanum, a worthy memorial. My dear friends, may this link our hearts to the old Goetheanum, which we had to consign to the elements. May it link our hearts also to the spirit, to the soul of this Goetheanum. With this vow before whatever is best within our being, we want to live on not only into the new year, in strength of deed, bearing the spirit, leading the soul, we want to live on into the new cosmic year. My dear friends, you greeted me this evening by standing in memory of the old Goetheanum. You are living in the memory of this old Goetheanum. Let us stand once more as a sign that we vow to work on in the spirit of the Goetheanum with whatever best forces we can find in the image of our inner human being. Indeed, so be it. Amen. Thus let us continue, my dear friends, as long as we are able, in accordance with the will that unites our human souls with the souls of the gods, with whom we wish to keep faith in the Spirit out of which we sought this faith with them at a certain moment in our lives, at that moment when we sought the spiritual wisdom of the Goetheanum. Let us understand how to keep this faith. The end of the lecture. This is a reading of the Christmas Conference for the Foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923-1924. This is Part 17, continuation of the Foundation meeting on the 1st of January, 1924, at 10 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Steiner. Once more, my dear friends, we shall welcome to our souls what is to inspire us and bring us strength during this conference. Soul of man, thou livest in the limbs which bear thee through the world of space, in the spirit's ocean being. Practice spirit recalling in depths of soul, where in the wielding will of world creating, thine own eye comes to being within God's eye, and thou wilt truly live in the world being of man. For the Father Spirit of the heights holds sway in depths of worlds, begetting being. Seraphim, cherubim, thrones, let there ring out from the heights what in the depths is echoed, speaking, ex Deo natsimur. Soul of man, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, which leads thee through the rhythm of time, into the realm of thine own soul's feeling. Practice spirit awareness in balance of the soul, where the surging deeds of the world's becoming thine own eye unite with the world eye, and thou wilt truly feel in the soul weaving of man. For the Christ will in the encircling round holds sway, in the rhythms of the worlds, bestowing grace on the soul. Curiotities, dynamis, exousiae, let there be fired from the east what through the west is formed, speaking, in Christo moremur. Soul of man, thou livest in the resting head, which from the grounds of eternity opens to thee the world thoughts. Practice spirit beholding in stillness of thought, where the eternal aims of God's world being's light on thine own eye bestow for thy free willing, and thou wilt truly think in the spirit foundations of man. For the world thoughts of the Spirit hold sway in the being of worlds, craving for light. Archai, archangeloi, angeloi, let there be prayed from the depths what in the heights will be granted, speaking per spiritum sanctum revivissimus. Today we shall inscribe a simple rhythm into our souls. Rudolf Steiner writes on the blackboard as he speaks, see facsimile 5, page XVIII, top. Thou livest in the limbs, for the Father Spirit of the heights holds sway, in depths of worlds begetting being. Thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, for the Christ will in the encircling round holds sway, in the rhythms of the worlds, bestowing grace on the soul. Thou livest in the resting head, for the world thoughts of the Spirit hold sway, in the being of worlds, craving for light. And as shown on the blackboard, first triplet of lines, thou livest in the limbs, for the Father Spirit of the heights holds sway, in depths of worlds begetting being. Second triplet, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, for the Christ will in the encircling round holds sway, in the rhythms of the worlds, bestowing grace on the soul. And the third one, thou livest in the resting head, for the world thoughts of the Spirit hold sway, in the being of worlds, craving for light. I thus write down for you the rhythms as they resound together, because they do indeed encompass an image of the starry constellations. we say Saturn is in the sign of Leo or Saturn is in the sign of Scorpio. Rhythms depend on this. Rhythms that go through the world. An image of primeval spirit lives in such rhythms, in the way I have written them down for you over the course of these last days, having taken them from our verses, which are inwardly organized through and through in accordance with the realm of spirit and soul. Now, to continue with our meeting, Herr Krebs would like to speak. Herr Krebs speaks. Dr. Steiner. On the question of the opposition, Herr Wolfgang Wachsmuth and then Herr Hart wish to speak. Herr Wolfgang Wachsmuth speaks about books and the question of the opposition. Dr. Steiner. Obviously, if such a group is formed, then if it needs advice in one matter or another, it will find this advice here. That is what I would like to say as a direct reply to the question. Does anyone else wish to speak with regard to the question of the opposition? Herr Verbeck speaks on the question of the opposition. Dr. Steiner. I would now ask Herr Hart to speak. He does not respond. Now, Herr Leinhaus would like to speak. Herr Leinhaus speaks about the question of the opposition and about the press. Dr. Steiner. Dr. Stein will speak next. Dr. Walter Johannes Stein speaks on the question of the opposition. Dr. Steiner. I would now like your permission to proceed to the matter of the rebuilding of the Goetheanum. Now there is a lecture by Rudolf Steiner entitled The Rebuilding of the Goetheanum, again on the 1st of January in the morning, and I believe with this is interspersed still some meeting items. I shall take the liberty of adding a few remarks to what I said yesterday, after which I shall invite contributions from those who have asked to speak. You will remember that I endeavored to solve the problem of the outside of the Goetheanum as well as was possible at the time by treating it as a building problem. A number of aspects were, though, made more difficult than they need have been by the speed at which the building was expected to be constructed. Nevertheless, I believe that the shaping of the facade, of the portals, of the windows and window surrounds did portray outwardly the inner content of the Goetheanum, which was essentially a circular building. Now, as I attempted to describe it to you yesterday, the impression is to be of a building that is partly circular and partly rectangular, having no longer a ground plan that is circular. And it will be necessary to find, for the forms, a modern style that is appropriate for concrete as a building material. Such things are always exceedingly difficult. It is, of course, easier to work in an abstract way out of the forms, and then choose the material. Then it is to accept the material as the necessary given factor, and then search for the forms out of this material. Forms which are also partly determined by the circumstances which I described to you yesterday. Now, since we do not have time to go into more detail, I want to show you one essential feature, the underlying theme of the portals and of the windows, so that you can see how I want to let the inner formative force that was latent in the old forms assert itself once more also in the new forms of the intractable material concrete. I want the walls, coming down from the roof, which is shaped in flat surfaces, to give the eye a definite impression of load. I want to bring it about that this downward pressure is caught and held, also for the eye, by the portal as well as the window surrounds. I also want to bring it about that inwardly the spiritual impression is of a portal that draws you in, or a window that takes in the light in order to usher it into the space within. But at the same time I want to bring it about that in a certain way this form reveals how the Goetheanum is to be a kind of shelter for the one who seeks the spirit within it. This will also have to be expressed by the portal, so let me describe what is to be revealed. See facsimile 5, page XX, and there's a picture here. For instance, on the west front, the roof will rise up like this. So I want the next thing appearing after the roof to be a kind of small form growing out of this roofing. Let me make it easier for you to see by using different colors to draw what will of course be all the same color. So this will jut out, lemon yellow. It will be immediately above the head of someone who is standing before the portal, about to enter. Below that will be a portion, something that could be seen as a portion of a pentagon, but only a portion, and it's reddish. The remainder of the pentagon would be above. And the whole of this is carried by a form which recedes, in blue. So what you remember as rounded forms in the earlier Goetheanum will here appear as something angular. You must imagine that this comes forward like a kind of roof, lemon yellow. This goes back inward, blue, and this becomes visible in the background, whitish. And the whole of this is to be supported by a pillar shape to the left and to the right, in such a way that this pillar or column receives this protective form which appears above the head of the one who enters. It receives this protective form in another form, orange yellow, like this, but at the same time it carries the roof part with an appropriate form which grows out of it. This form will be used for both the side and main portals, and for the windows. And in the use of this form, we shall be able to achieve a really integrated external impression. It will show, on the one hand, how the load pressing down from above is carried, and on the other hand, how the pillars rise up in order to support that which comes out from the inside, revealing itself and needing to be received. The essential thing about an angular building is the harmony between the forces of support and load. If we are to carry this out in an organic building, every part must reveal the indwelling character of the totality. The pillars in the old building reached from bottom to top. Now they will be metamorphosed, so that on the lower level, the ground level, they will develop like roots, architecturally conceived, of course. Out of these, the actual pillars will grow on the upper level, becoming bearers of the whole. They will then bring the forms of the roof to completion from within outward. The roof will not be terminated horizontally, but rather in the way the cupola was terminated. Pillars and columns will be metamorphosed into supporting elements, while at the same time expressing what, in the old Goetheanum, was to have been expressed in the roundness of the building. We shall have to endeavor to calculate how basic the forms will have to be, merely hinted at perhaps, in order to keep the whole building, given this shape, within 3 to 3.5 million francs. Once we have made this decision, and I do not believe that any other is possible, then we shall, I hope, and if the willingness of our friends to make sacrifices does not let us down, soon be in a position to begin construction, and the building will then appear as a new Goetheanum in the place where the old one stood, and in a much more basic and simple form. I would now like to call on Herr van Leer, who has asked to speak on this matter. Herr van Leer wants to found a World Goetheanum Association, resembling a World School Association, for the running of the Goetheanum. Dr. Steiner: Yes, my dear friends, I cannot see any objection to the creation of a body of people who are members of a Goetheanum association, or something similar, even if they are not members of the Anthroposophical Society. The question will be, though, as to what the members of such an organization can be called upon to do. It will be very difficult to win members merely by saying that they should pay money for the Goetheanum or for any other of our ventures. But perhaps in future anthroposophy as such, as represented now here in Dornach, will become more and more known in the world. Perhaps people who are not in the first instance courageous enough to become anthroposophists will see that fruitful work can be done out of anthroposophy and with anthroposophy. Then it might be possible to say to people, look, this is a spiritual movement, Maybe you are not interested now, but help it to mature. Do something so that the people involved can get going and show what they can do. It is quite likely, if we carry out into the world what has been discussed here during this conference, that an association, such as that envisaged by our dear friend Van Leer, might indeed become a possibility. Do not forget that a good deal of what is now included in the statutes is of necessity bound up with the complete openness of the society. You will see that much will change in practice. And once there is an understanding everywhere of what is connected with this openness of the society, then it could very well be that a form such as that suggested just now by Van Leer will be found. This openness will have to be taken very, very seriously by us. And on the other hand, we here at the Goetheanum, this Vorstand, will have to take very seriously the fact that in future there can be no more working under cover. It will no longer be possible to say, if we approach people about a threefold social order or about anthroposophy, they don't want to know about this, but they are interested in the things themselves. This is something that has done us the most damage of all over the last few years, or indeed over a longer period too, because it has brought us inwardly into a sphere of untruthfulness. The work going out from Dornach in future, in all realms of life, will be uprightly and honestly declared in full openness as being for anthroposophy. Then people will know for what they are giving their money. And if we work from this angle, then I do believe that a form such as you have suggested will become possible. It will never be possible if people have to ask what they are supposed to give money for. This is what I believed I ought to say. If this is done, then the prospects are quite good. Would anybody else like to speak on the question of the rebuilding? Miss X believes that eurythmy can show the public a great deal of what anthroposophy is about. She asks for pictures of eurythmy, and the picture of Frau Dr. Steiner for publication in South America. Mr. Munges hopes to arouse interest in America. Quote, Americans have to see before they will give. Close quote. Dr. Steiner, does anyone else wish to speak? Herr Donner speaks about the financial situation. Dr. Steiner, does anyone else wish to speak? Mademoiselle Sauerwein asks whether the 12 shillings are for the Society or the Goetheanum. Dr. Steiner, in order to clarify the question Mademoiselle Sauerwein has brought to our agenda, I should report to you on the meeting in committee the other day of the General Secretaries of many different countries with the Vorstand and with representatives of the Swiss groups. I must tell you what conclusions were reached. It was a matter of completing the only point of the statutes which could not be finalized before they were printed. We have adopted the statutes, but one small point remained open, because I said that it would be better to discuss it in a smaller circle first, and that was the matter of the annual contribution to be made by the groups for each member. I brought the following points of view to that smaller circle. You see, an anthroposophist, let me say this, though of course it will be easily questioned, an anthroposophist does not entertain illusions, but must think realistically, for the future too. To think realistically is to say that one will need this much money for a particular project. That is, to make a preliminary annual budget which is likely to be sufficient. For the founding of the Anthroposophical Society, there is no sense financially in talking a great deal about what each individual thinks should be paid annually for each member. The only sensible thing to do is to say how much we need, and then to calculate how much this is likely to come to when it is divided by the number of paying members. I have concerned myself very fundamentally with this question ever since I decided, with the agreement of the members of the Vorstand, whom I considered to be the right ones, to take the presidency of the Anthroposophical Society into my own hands. All I can do is to tell you the conclusion given to me as a result of my considerations. If we really want to run the society, which you yourselves have decided shall exist, the only thing we can do is ourselves lay down the amount which we need from every group for each member. All we can do is enter at this point in the statutes the membership contribution to be made by every group for each of its members. 12 shillings annually. That is only 1 shilling monthly. You can work out what a minute amount that is per day. But we cannot manage without these 12 shillings annually for each member. We could, of course, have started off the other way round, though I don't know whether this would have been more dignified. We could first have said we need 12 shillings from every member, and then we shall found the Anthroposophical Society. Perhaps that would have been more practical. However that may be, the society will only be realistically founded when we have these 12 shillings annually. Now, my dear friends, there are sure to be many groups who will say that they cannot raise this amount. There are groups whose membership fees would not even cover this, and they all want to keep at least half of the membership fee for themselves. So in the cases where this is so, it will be a matter of negotiating with them how much they can reduce their contribution. And the missing amount will have to be raised in another way. We still need this missing amount. But this minimum sum which we need will have to be the standard, and then groups can go below it, which is bound to happen, as we well know from experience, down even to the vanishing point. The vanishing point is often reached. But I hope that there will also be instances of the opposite, right up to the level of Carnegie, though of course never quite reaching the infinite. Anyway, this is the suggestion that I wanted to make in a smaller circle. And this smaller circle did not by any means agree immediately. But I do believe that most have, meanwhile, come to see that there is no other way. Countries also do it like this. You cannot set up a budget and then ask every single citizen, how much can you pay? This is not how it is done. We, admittedly, have no means of enforcing collection, and of course we want no such thing, for there must be freedom amongst us, including that of saying how much we need. So if you like, please do not say what you think, or at least vote on whether you agree in principle. So if you like, please do not say what you think, or at least vote on whatever you agree in principle, to the payment of 12 shillings per member, always remembering that everyone can negotiate how much below this is necessary to go. I had to say this if this matter was to be discussed. There is applause. Mademoiselle Sauerwein says that these 12 shillings will be contributed by France, because they are needed, and she would like to know the date by which payment is required. Dr. Steiner, the date will be a matter of administration. In the very near future, since time is too short to do so at the conference, we shall issue bylaws to the various groups, and in these we shall say when the contributions can be paid. They do not all have to come in at the same time. The method will gradually emerge, and agreements can be made with the different groups as to when it suits them to pay. Certainly we shall not shirk. Does anyone want to speak to this question of the membership contribution? Mr. Pyle suggests that agreement be expressed immediately on the point that the 12 shillings per year would be raised somehow, since they were absolutely necessary. Dr. Steiner, it has been suggested that we vote straight away on this question of the membership contribution. Does anyone want to speak about this suggestion, which is actually a matter for the bylaws? Only on the suggestion, not on the question. If that is not the case, then I now call for a vote on this suggestion. Will those friends who are in favor of the standard membership contribution being set at 12 shillings, with the given proviso, please raise their hands? They do. Will those member friends not in favor now also please raise their hands? There seems to be cordial agreement on this point. I intended to bring up this point at the end of today's agenda, but it has now been settled. So after this interruption we can continue with the agenda, if anyone still wants to speak about the rebuilding of the Goetheanum or about Herr van Leer's suggestion. Mrs. Mary wishes to speak. Dr. Steiner: would anyone else like to speak on this? Herr Koschutzky touches on the question of finance. He considers that work at research institutes is the most suitable for obtaining money for the Goetheanum from non-anthroposophists. Dr. Steiner: so long as these things are in future always shown to be intimately bound up with anthroposophy, it would be wrong to give the impression of merely wanting to do some research through ordinary science. In future we want to put things before the world simply as they emerge from the central core of anthroposophy. Of course, there is a good deal which does have to be presented in public in a way that is not possible through pictures, since pictures at best bring something supersensible into the realm of the sense perceptible. But we are supposed to present the supersensible to the world. This is of course difficult, more difficult than presenting something sense perceptible, but we must succeed, and we shall succeed. But please have the courage to present the supersensible, and not something that appears as though through a mask. This has brought us enough harm. Does anyone else wish to speak? Herr Leinhaus speaks about the building of the Goetheanum and about the organization. He believes that friends can be won on the basis of pointing out what is said in the statutes. Dr. Steiner: does anyone else wish to speak? Dr. Kruger speaks of personal impressions and of his feelings for what has been experienced here as a primeval founding. Dr. Steiner: now, dear friends, let me throw the discussion open for any subject people might still want to mention. Herr Goethe says that the journal titled Anthroposophie and the articles of Herr Steffen and Dr. Steiner are particularly valuable for disseminating anthroposophy. Dr. Steiner: does anyone else wish to speak about anything? Dr. Zeilmans speaks from the medical point of view. There is surely no realm more in need of renewal than that of medicine. About 35 doctors were present at the founding of the small clinic in The Hague, and by the end they were very enthusiastic about the lectures. It can certainly be said that we do not want anything different, but we do want more. The lectures heard up to now have been marvelous, but what is needed is not only a bridge such as this, but also an entirely new kingdom in one's heart, in order as a doctor to become a healer in the sense of earlier times. He, therefore, especially welcomes the founding of the medical section. Dr. Steiner: you will allow me, my dear friends, to add a few words after my lecture this evening about such questions as, for instance, the shaping of the medical work, and how we can and how we think about it. I shall do so then, because I want to ask any friends who would still like to say something in brief about one thing or another to do so now. The farewell words I myself want to say, and also what I want to say about questions such as that brought up so kindly by Dr. Zeilmans just now, I shall say in connection with my lecture this evening. So would anyone who still has a short contribution to make please do so? Herr Wuhlschläger, a teacher, speaks about the question of a school in Switzerland, considers a school in Basel to be absolutely necessary, and requests support of every kind. Dr. Steiner: now, we have come to the end of our agenda. Or rather, we should say that time has brought us to the end of our agenda. It will be satisfying this afternoon, on the very day on which we saw, for the first time, from the grounds just outside here, the ruins still in flames. On this very anniversary of that terrible day, we shall meet here at 4:30 for a social gathering. The thought of meeting for such a gathering on this very day can be particularly dear to us, when, for one or another, it may be possible to speak together in the most intense and best and intimate way, such as will seem suitable for this very day of mourning and remembrance, and such as our heart must long for. So, at 4:30, we shall assemble here for our social gathering. At 8:30, my final lecture will take place. The practicing doctors are requested to meet me again tomorrow morning at 8:30 down in a glass house. I shall make any further announcements this evening. Anything which one or another of you might still have wished to say will now remain unsaid. But just as last time it was possible for one or two things intended for more than a personal conversation to be said to everyone during the social gathering, so this time, too, it will be possible to speak to the members during the social gathering, if anyone wishes to do so. Now, will those friends from Germany who wish to travel tomorrow at 10:45 please raise their hands so that Dr. Wachsmuth can see how many there are wishing to travel tomorrow morning? Now, will those wishing to take the evening train please raise their hands? It will not be easy to arrange for anyone to stay any longer. Only those who have had their passes extended properly can remain. It is not possible to endanger future meetings here by allowing the authorities to notice that 50 or more people are leaving later than intended. If only a few depart, it will not be possible to arrange for extra lodgings. Also, would you please hand in any unused meal tickets at Haus Friedwart? In addition, would you please hand in the blankets you have used at Haus Friedwart, because we shall need them for future meetings. Then would those friends who have not yet collected their passes from Haus Friedwart please do so, because we have no use for them. We would, of course, gladly travel away on behalf of every one of you, if we only could. Finally, for those friends still here, there will be a eurythmy performance at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. The program will include a repeat of Olaf Asteson. The end of part 17. This is part 18 of a reading of the Christmas Conference for the foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society 1923-1924. Part 18 is a lecture by Rudolf Steiner entitled On the Right Entry into the Spiritual World, the Responsibility Incumbent on Us. Lecture and Words of Farewell by Rudolf Steiner. Given on the 1st of January, 1924, at 8:30 in the evening. My dear friends, we are gathered together for the last time in this conference, from which much that is strong and important is to go forth for the Anthroposophical movement. So now let me shape this final lecture in a way that connects it inwardly in its impulse with the various prospects thrown open to us by this series of lectures as a whole, but also in a way that will allow us to gain a sense for the future, especially the future of anthroposophical endeavor. When we look out into the world today, we see something that has already been there for many years, a tremendous amount of destructiveness. There are forces at work that give us an inkling of the abysses into which Western civilization is still to plunge. Looking at those individuals who externally are the cultural leaders in the various fields of life, we notice how they are enmeshed in a terrible cosmic sleep. They think, and until recently most people thought, that until the 19th century mankind was childlike and primitive in its insights and views, and that now that modern science has entered into all the various fields, truth has at last arrived, truth that must be upheld forever. People who think like this are, without knowing it, living in a state of tremendous arrogance. On the other hand, here and there amongst mankind today, there are some inklings that things are perhaps not as the majority would like to imagine. Some time ago, I was able to give a number of lectures in Germany organized by the Wolf Agency. The audiences were exceptionally large, so that people here and there began to notice that anthroposophy was something for which people were looking. All kinds of foolish voices were raised in antagonism, among them one which was not much more intelligent than any of the others, but which, nevertheless, expressed a kind of presentiment. It consisted of a note in a newspaper referring to one of the lectures in Berlin. This notice in the newspaper said, "Listening to stuff like this, you get the impression," I am quoting the article approximately, "that something is happening not only on the earth but also in the whole of the cosmos that is calling mankind to a form of spirituality that is different from what has existed so far. Even the forces of the cosmos, not merely earthly impulses, are demanding something of mankind, a kind of revolution in the cosmos, which must lead man to strive for a new spirituality. So there was this voice, which was in its way quite remarkable. For it is true, the proper impulse for what must now go forth from Dornach must, as I have emphasized from various angles over the last few days, be an impulse arising not on the earth, but in the spiritual world. Here we want to develop the strength to follow the impulses coming from the spiritual world. In the evening lectures during this Christmas conference, I have spoken about manifold impulses present in historical development, so that your hearts might be opened to take in spiritual impulses which still have to stream into the earthly world, and are not taken from the earthly world itself. Everything that has hitherto borne the earthly world in the right way has had its source in the spiritual world. And if we are to achieve something fruitful for the earthly world, we must turn to the spiritual world for the appropriate impulses. My dear friends, this encourages me to point out that the impulses we are to bear away with us from this conference must be linked to a great sense of responsibility. Let us spend a few minutes on the great responsibility that is now incumbent on us as a result of this conference. In recent decades, it has been possible for someone with a sense for the spiritual world to wander in spiritual observation past many personalities, gaining bitter sensations with regard to the future destiny of mankind on earth. It has been possible to wander past one's fellow human beings in a manner available to spiritual insight, observing how they lay aside their physical and etheric bodies in sleep and live in the spiritual world with their ego and astral body. Wandering among the destinies of those egos and astral bodies while human beings slept has in recent decades given rise to experiences which can point to a heavy responsibility incumbent on the one who can know such things. These souls, having left behind their physical and etheric bodies between going to sleep and waking up, were often to be seen approaching the guardian of the threshold. The guardian of the threshold has entered the awareness of human beings in many and various ways during the course of human evolution. Many a legend and many a saga, for this is the form in which the most important things are preserved, rather than that of historical records. Many a legend and many a saga tells of the approach of one personality or another to the guardian of the threshold, in order to receive instruction on how to enter the spiritual world, and then return once more to the physical world. Entering rightly into the spiritual world must bring with it the possibility of returning to the physical world at any moment, with a full ability to stand on both feet as a practical and thoughtful human being, not as a dreamer, not as a dreamy mystic. Throughout all the thousands of years during which human beings have striven to enter the spiritual world, this has been the fundamental stipulation of the guardian of the threshold. But especially in the final third of the 19th century, hardly any human beings were to be seen approaching the guardian of the threshold in a state of wakefulness. And even more so in our own time, when mankind as a whole has the historical task of passing by the guardian of the threshold in one way or another, do you find, when wandering in the spiritual world, that souls are asleep when they approach the guardian of the threshold as egos and astral bodies? This most significant picture meets us today. There stands the guardian of the threshold, surrounded by groups of sleeping human souls who do not have the strength to approach him in a waking state, but who approach him instead while they are asleep. Witnessing this scene, you become aware of a thought which is bound up particularly with what I would like to call the germination of a necessary great responsibility. The souls who thus approach the guardian of the threshold in a state of sleep demand entry into the spiritual world. They demand to be allowed to wander across the threshold in a state of sleep. Their consciousness is that of a sleeping human being, which, so far as the waking state is concerned, remains unconscious or subconscious. And countless times the voice of the grave guardian of the threshold is heard. For your own good you may not cross the threshold. You may not gain entrance to the spiritual world. Go back. For if the guardian of the threshold were to allow them to enter without more ado, they would come over into the spiritual world with all the concepts passed on to them by today's schools, today's education, today's civilization. With all those concepts and ideas with which human beings have to grow up nowadays, from their 6th year onward, right, you could say, until the end of their earthly lives. These concepts and ideas have a particular characteristic. If you enter into the spiritual world with them, with the way you have become with them through present-day civilization and schooling, you become paralyzed in your soul. And on returning to the physical world, you would be void of thoughts and ideas. If the guardian of the threshold did not gravely reject these souls, if he were not to reject many, many of today's human souls, but were to let them step over into the spiritual world, then waking up on their return, waking up at the decisive moment on their return, they would have the feeling, I cannot think. My thoughts do not grasp my brain. I have to live in the world without thoughts. For the world of abstract ideas, which human beings today attach to everything, is such that one can indeed go into the spiritual world with them, but one cannot bring them out again. And when you watch this scene, which is experienced today by more souls than you would ordinarily imagine, you say to yourself, if only these souls could be successfully protected from experiencing also in death what they are now experiencing in sleep. For if the inner condition experienced before the guardian of the threshold were to endure for a sufficiently long period of time, if human civilization were to remain for a long time under the influence of what can be taken in schools by way of what is traditionally passed down by civilization, then sleep would become ordinary life. Human souls would pass through the portal of death into the spiritual world, and then be incapable of bringing any strength of ideas with them into their new life on earth. For though you can enter the spiritual world with today's thoughts, you then cannot leave it with them. You can only leave it in a state of soul paralysis. You see, present-day civilization can be founded on the kind of cultural life that has been nurtured for so long. But life cannot be founded on it. It would be possible for this civilization to endure for a while. During their waking hours, the souls would have no inkling of the guardian of the threshold. Then, while they slept, they would be turned away by him so that they should not become paralyzed. And the final consequence would be that a human race would be born in the future without any understanding, without any possibility of applying ideas to life when they were born in this future time, so that the faculty of thinking and living in ideas would have disappeared from the earth. A sick human race living only in instincts would have to populate the earth. Terrible feelings and emotions alone, without orientation through the force of ideas, would come to dominate human evolution. Indeed, the soul, failing to gain entry into the spiritual world, and being turned away by the guardian of the threshold in the way I have just described, is not the only sad sight to meet the one who has spiritual vision. If such a one were to take with him a human being from Eastern civilization on his journeyings to where the sleeping souls can be observed approaching the guardian of the threshold, then such an Eastern human being would be heard to utter spirit words of terrible reproach toward the whole of Western civilization. See, if this goes on, then the earth will have fallen into barbarism by the time those living today return for a new incarnation. People will live by instincts alone, without ideas. This is what you have brought about by falling away from the ancient spirituality of the Orient. I believe that's all said by the Eastern person. Thus, a glimpse like this into the spiritual world bears witness to a strong sense of responsibility for the task of man. And here in Dornach, there must be a place where it is possible to speak to those who wish to listen about every important direct experience of the spiritual world. Here there must be a place where the strength is found to point to those little traces of the Spirit, not only in the cleverly put dialectical and empirical scientific manner of the present time. If Dornach is to fulfill its task, then it must be a place where human beings can hear openly about what is going on historically in the spiritual world, and about the spiritual impulses which then enter into the world of nature and govern it. Human beings must be able to hear in Dornach about genuine experiences, genuine forces, and genuine beings of the spiritual world. This is where the school of true spiritual science must be. And we must henceforth not shy away from the demands of modern scientific thought, which causes human beings to approach the earnest guardian of the threshold in a state of sleep, in the way I have described. In Dornach it must be possible to win the strength spiritually, to look the spiritual world in the eye, to learn about the spiritual world. Therefore we shall not let loose a tirade of dialectics on the inadequacy of present-day scientific theory. Instead, I had to draw your attention to the position in which this scientific theory and its consequences in ordinary schools places the human being with regard to the guardian of the threshold. If we can face up to this in our soul, in all earnestness, during this conference, then this Christmas conference will send a strong impulse into our souls, which can carry them away to do strong work of the kind needed by mankind today, so that in their next incarnation human beings will be able to encounter the guardian of the threshold properly, or rather, so that civilization as a whole will measure up to the guardian of the threshold. Compare today's civilization with that of former times. In all former civilizations there were ideas, concepts, which were turned first of all toward the supersensible world, toward the gods, toward the world which engendered, which created, which brought forth. Then with those concepts, which belonged above all to the gods, it was possible to look down onto the earthly world in order to understand it with concepts and ideas which were worthy of the gods. And if souls then approached the guardian of the threshold with these ideas, which had been formed in a manner that was worthy of the gods, and that had a value for the gods, then the guardian said, "You may pass, for you are bringing with you into the supersensible world something that is directed toward this supersensible world, even during the time of your life on earth in a physical body. Therefore, when you return to the physical, sense-perceptible world, sufficient strength will remain to prevent you from becoming paralyzed through having seen the supersensible world." Nowadays, human beings elaborate concepts and ideas which, in accordance with the genius of the times, they want to apply solely to the physical sense-perceptible world. These concepts and ideas deal, above all, with anything that can be weighed and measured, but they are not at all concerned with the gods. They are not worthy of the gods, and they are of no value to the gods. That is why the souls who have fallen entirely under the spell of the materialism of these ideas, which are unworthy of the gods and valueless for the gods, are met, when they cross the threshold in sleep, by the thundering voice of the guardian of the threshold. Do not step across the threshold. You have misused your ideas for the sense-perceptible world. Therefore you must remain with them in the sense-perceptible world. If you do not want to become paralyzed in your soul, you cannot enter with them into the world of the gods. Such things have to be said, not because it is necessary to brood upon them, but so that heart and mind and soul may become filled to the brim with them. Then we may come into the mood that will be the right mood to bear away from this solemn Christmas conference of the Anthroposophical Society. The most important thing of all is the mood of soul we bear away with us, a mood of soul for the spiritual world that gives us the certainty. In Dornach, a central point for spiritual knowledge will be created. That is why it was so good to hear Dr. Zeilmans speak this morning about a field which is to be cultivated here in Dornach, the field of medicine, and to hear him say that it is no longer possible to build bridges from ordinary science to what is to be founded here in Dornach. If we have the ambition to make what grows in the soil of our own medical research into something that can stand the scrutiny of present-day clinical requirements, then we shall never achieve any definite goal in the things that really make up our task. For then other people will simply say, yeah, well, yes, here is a new method. We too have initiated new methods once in a while. The important thing is that a branch of practical life, such as medicine, should be taken up into anthroposophical life. I think I understood rightly this morning that this is what Dr. Zeilmans longs for. Did he not say in connection with this goal that someone who today becomes a doctor longs for impulses from a new corner of the universe? Let me tell you that in the field of medicine, the work here in Dornach is to be carried on, just as has that in a number of other fields of anthroposophical work, which have remained within the bosom of anthroposophy. With Dr. Wegmann as my helper, work is already in train on a system of medicine based entirely on anthroposophy, a system which is needed by mankind, and which will be presented to mankind quite soon. Equally, it is my purpose to bring about the closest ties between the Goetheanum and the clinic in Arlesheim, which is working so beneficially. In the very near future, such ties are to be brought about so that all that is flourishing there may be truly oriented toward anthroposophy, which is indeed the intention of Dr. Wegmann. In what he said, Dr. Zeilmans was indicating with reference to one particular field what the Vorstand in Dornach will make its task in all the fields of anthroposophical work. Thus in future the situation will be clear. No one will say, let us first show people eurythmy. If they hear nothing about anthroposophy, then they will take eurythmy, and then, having taken a liking to eurythmy, if they hear that anthroposophy stands as the foundation for eurythmy, they will take a liking to anthroposophy as well. No one will say, first we must show people how the medicines work in practice, so that they see that they are proper medicines and will buy them. Then, if they later hear that anthroposophy is behind the medicines, they will also approach anthroposophy. We must have the courage to regard such a method as dishonest. Not until we have the courage to regard such a method as dishonest, not until we inwardly detest such a method, will anthroposophy find its way through the world. So in future, here in Dornach, we shall fight for the truth, not fanatically, but simply in an honest, straightforward love of the truth. Perhaps this will enable us to make good some of what has so sinfully been made bad in recent years. With thoughts which are not easy, but which are grave, we must depart from this conference that has led to the founding of the General Anthroposophical Society. But I do not think that it will be necessary for anybody to go away with pessimism from what has taken place here this Christmas. Every day we have had to walk past the sad ruins of the Goetheanum. But as we have walked up this hill, past these ruins, I think that in every soul there has also been the content of what has been discussed here, and what has quite evidently been understood by our friends in their hearts. From all this, the thought has emerged. It will be possible for spiritual flames of fire to arise as a true spiritual life for the blessing of mankind in the future from the Goetheanum, which is being built anew. They shall rise out of our hard work and out of our devotion. The more we go from here with the courage to carry on the affairs of anthroposophy, the better have we heard the breath of the Spirit wafting, filled with hope, through our gathering. For the scene which I have described to you, and which can be seen so frequently, that scene of present-day human beings, the products of a decadent civilization and education, approaching the guardian of the threshold in a state of sleep, is actually not one which is found amongst the circle of sensitive anthroposophists. Here, on the whole, the circumstance is such that only a warning, one particular exhortation resounds. In hearing the voice from the land of the Spirit, you must develop the strong courage to bear witness to this voice, for you have begun to awaken. Courage will keep you awake. Lack of courage alone could lead you to fall asleep. The exhortation to be awake through courage is the other variation, the variation for anthroposophists in the life of present-day civilization. Those who are not anthroposophists here, you must remain outside the land of the Spirit. You have misused ideas for merely earthly objects. You have not gathered ideas which have value for the gods, and which are worthy of the gods. You would be paralyzed on your return to the physical sense-perceptible world. But those souls who are the souls of anthroposophists here, your remaining test is to be that of your courage, to bear witness to that voice which you are capable of hearing because of the inclination of your soul, because of the inclination of your heart. My dear friends, yesterday was the anniversary of the day on which we saw the tongues of flame devouring our old Goetheanum. Today we may hope, since a year ago we did not allow even the flames to distract us from continuing with our work, today we may hope that when the physical Goetheanum stands here once more, we shall have worked in such a way that the physical Goetheanum is only the external symbol for our spiritual Goetheanum, which we want to take with us as an idea as we now go out into the world. We have here laid the foundation stone. On this foundation stone shall be erected the building whose individual stones will be the work achieved in all our groups by the individuals outside in the wide world. Let us now look in spirit at this work and become conscious of the responsibility about which I have spoken today, of our responsibility toward the human being who stands before the guardian of the threshold and has to be refused entry into the spiritual world. Certainly it should never occur to us to feel anything but the deepest pain and the deepest sorrow about what happened to us a year ago. But let us not forget that everything in the world that has any stature has been born out of pain. So let us transform our pain, so that out of it may arise a strong and shining anthroposophical society, by dint, my dear friends, of your work. For this purpose, we have immersed ourselves in those words with which I began, in those words with which I wish to close this Christmas conference, which is to be for us a festival of consecration, not merely for the beginning of a new year, but for the beginning of a new turning point of time, to which we want to devote ourselves in enthusiastic cultivation of the life of spirit. Soul of man, thou livest in the limbs which bear thee through the world of space, in the spirit's ocean being. Practice spirit recalling in depths of soul, where in the wielding will of world creating, thine own eye comes to being within God's eye. And thou wilt truly live in the world being of man. For the Father Spirit of the heights holds sway in depths of worlds, begetting being. Seraphim, cherubim, thrones, let there ring out from the heights what in the depths is echoed, speaking, Ex Deo Nascimur. The spirits of the elements hear it, in east, west, north, south. May human beings hear it. Soul of man, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, which leads thee through the rhythm of time into the realm of thine own soul's feeling. Practice spirit awareness in balance of the soul, where the surging deeds of the world's becoming thine own eye unite with the world eye. And thou wilt truly feel in the soul weaving of man. For the Christ will in the encircling round holds sway, in the rhythms of the worlds, bestowing grace on the soul. Curiotities, dunamis, exousiae, let there be fired from the east what through the west is formed, speaking, in Christo morimur. The spirits of the elements hear it, in east, west, north, south. May human beings hear it. Soul of man, thou livest in the resting head, which from the grounds of eternity opens to thee the world thoughts. Practice spirit beholding in stillness of thought, where the eternal aims of God's world being's light on thine own eye bestow for thy free willing. And thou wilt truly think in the spirit foundations of man. For the world thoughts of the spirit hold sway in the being of worlds, craving for light. Archai, archangeloi, angeloi. Let there be prayed from the depths what in the heights will be granted, speaking per spiritum sanctum reverissimus. At the turning of the time, the spirit light of the world entered the stream of earthly being. Darkness of night had held its sway. Day, radiant light, streamed into souls of men. Light that gives warmth to simple shepherds' hearts. Light that enlightens the wise heads of kings. Light divine, Christ Son, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads, that good may become what we from our hearts would found, what we from our heads would direct, in conscious willing. And so, my dear friends, bear out with you into the world your warm hearts, in whose soil you have laid the foundation stone for the Anthroposophical Society. Bear out with you your warm hearts, in order to do work in the world that is strong in healing. Help will come to you, because your heads will be enlightened by what you all now want to be able to direct in conscious willing. Let us today make this resolve with all our strength. And we shall see that if we show ourselves to be worthy, then a good star will shine over that which is willed from here. My dear friends, follow this good star. We shall see whither the God shall lead us through the light of this star. Light divine, Christ Son, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads. That is the end of the lecture and the end of the conference. There is a footnote, 2 footnotes. One is after Spiritum Sanctum Revivissimus. According to the shorthand report, the final words of the verse were not spoken on this occasion. And another one, in the following sentences, that was after the foundation stone on 25th December 1923, at which the foundation stone was laid in members' hearts, Rudolf Steiner once again changed from the formal mode of address to the more intimate du. This is a reading of the Christmas Conference for the foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923 to 1924. This is part 19, entitled On Behalf of the Members. Herr Verbeck. Dear and greatly respected Dr. Steiner, dear friends, there is no other way for this conference, so immensely meaningful for our society and our movement, to end except in an outpouring of deeply moved gratitude to the one whose work of love on the earth has brought us all together here. But, my dear friends, what can words express? Was not perhaps all that a word can do shown at the beginning of this conference by our respected friend Albert Steffen, when, indicating that gratitude cannot be expressed in words, he said, "Our gratitude is inexpressible." And yet, on the wings of these words, he did express everything our human hearts can give. Dear friends, words, addresses, resolutions, and all the rest are, measured against our conference, nothing but outdated, cheap requisites of the cultural life that is collapsing all around us. And no one knows the background to these cheap requisites better than the one who has spoken to us this evening, moving us in the depths of our being. What is, or rather can become, honest gratitude, this virtue of great profundity, we shall still have to practice with the help of the one who spoke to us today. He alone has shown us, through his spiritual work, what gratitude really is. If we understand him aright, then we know that for us, anthroposophists, the hour has come when we must set the deed of gratitude in the place of the word of gratitude. We must requite his immeasurably great deed of love with whatever deed of gratitude our puny strength can muster. For to him who spoke to us this evening, we owe nothing less than our own spiritual felicity. And we know that the worth it bears will be eternal. It pertains not only to the few years we may still have to breathe on this physical earth. The felicity he has bestowed on us will stretch ahead to our future incarnations too. We know that this has been a turning point for our further destiny. What we are permitted to experience through his deed of love is incalculably significant. But we know that the felicity brought by this love cannot be measured with the yardstick known to us from times preceding anthroposophy, for it will be paired with severe pain, with fateful destinies. But we also know that it is nevertheless a felicity that will lead us to salvation. And when our knowledge is truly tempered with feeling, then we know that words of gratitude are meaningless in face of this fact, and that our only answer to what we have received from here can be in deeds of gratitude. And we know, however weak our forces, that our deeds of gratitude can flow into his great deeds. And therefore, we also know that they can flow into the plan for salvation that is given to mankind today. For just as the great deeds are devoted to human beings, so may also the small deeds be devoted to human beings. Over this mighty life's work stands the heading, "Let everything be for the good of human beings." Oh, my dear friends, we know that something superhuman, something divine, is working in him. But when we answer with deeds directed toward human beings, we know that our deeds of gratitude will be felt at a human level. Yesterday he expressed it with the mighty fire of his great heart, faithfulness and yet more faithfulness. This is something human directed toward something human. And so, my dear friends, please stand once more. Let us say in our heart as we depart from this holy place, "You great and pure brother of mankind, out of our forces that are so very weak, we want to thank you. We want to thank you through our deeds, through overcoming what has to be overcome in the service of your holy mission for mankind. We beg you, be with us with the heavenly strength of your fatherly blessing." Dr. Steiner. My dear friends, I could not have said many of the things I have had to say during this conference in the form in which I said them, and similarly I could not accept the kind words of our dear friend Verbeck, if I were not to relate all this to a single weak individual. For actually in our circles these things should not be related to a mere individual. Yet, my dear friends, I know that I have been permitted to say what has here been said, for it was said in full responsibility, looking up to the Spirit who is there and who should be and will be the Spirit of the Goetheanum. In that Spirit's name I have permitted myself over the last few days to say a great many things which ought not to have been put so forcefully, had they not been expressed while looking up to the Spirit of the Goetheanum, to the good Spirit of the Goetheanum. So allow me, please, to accept these thanks in the name of the Spirit of the Goetheanum, for whom we want to work and strive and labor in the world. All that remains is to ask that the practicing doctors come to the glass house tomorrow morning, not at 8:30, but at 10 o'clock. I also have a message to read to you. Quote, "Out of our strong sharing in the experience of the Christmas Foundation Conference in Dornach, we greet the President of the Anthroposophical Society. We thank him and his colleagues in the Vorstand for taking on the leadership, and we also thank him for the statutes. From the members of the Anthroposophical Society in Cologne, who are meeting together at the close of the year." Close quote. This is all I have to say. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock there will be a eurythmy performance for those friends who are still here. The end of section 19. This is part 20 of a reading of the Christmas Conference for the Foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923 to 1924. This is part 3, the conclusion and appendices. And again, part 20, the conclusion by R.Steiner to the first German edition of 1944. The work that now began, without the interruption of even a single day, was at first devoted to medical knowledge. Its scientific aspect had to be filled full of genuine spiritual forces. The esoteric work, for which the younger doctors were so intensely striving, had to be deepened, so that the loving will and the healing will that requires so much selflessness in the practice of caring for the sick could be unfolded. On 2 January 1924, the third of the lectures to doctors was given, and also on 2 January, the course of 8 lectures to younger doctors and medical students began. It continued till 9 January. The evening lectures brought contemplations of the destinies of inner spiritual life between the 9th and the end of the 12th century. Title Rosicrucianism and Modern Initiation is the title of the cycle running from 4 to 13 January. In the final lecture we are led from the principle of Rosicrucian initiation up to the mystery of modern initiation and the beginning of the age of Michael. A lecture given to members on 18 January is of particular importance. It gives a concise account of the coming into being of the Anthroposophical Society, from its beginnings, through the war years, and right up to the completion of the building in Dornach. In opposition to the institutions being founded chiefly in Stuttgart, and to the work of scientists who join the society in considerable numbers, there arises the will to destroy it, held by a well-organized coalition of opponents. The gauntlet is thrown down when the Goetheanum is burnt to the ground, and finally we come, in view of the newly created world situation, to the new founding of the society as the General Anthroposophical Society. The question now demanding an answer of us is, how can anthroposophy be represented before the world? That lecture of 18 January culminates in this question. It also gives us a greater understanding of the coming inauguration of the classes. And in order to provide a firm basis for the spiritual schooling to be striven for, 9 lectures give new aspects of a deeper penetration into the nature of anthroposophy, made possible only by the work of many years, under the modest title of Anthroposophy and Introduction. At the same time, entitled Das Goetheanum, began the series of what came to be called Dr. Steiner's titled Letters to Members. In these, he endeavored to awaken and strengthen people's sense of responsibility for the forming of the life of the society and of what went on in the different branches. They have recently been republished in the little book Life, Nature, and Cultivation of Anthroposophy. From this foundation, Dr. Steiner goes on to what he describes as the special fields of the different sections at the Goetheanum. In the first few essays, under the title The School of Spiritual Science, he turns first to the promotion of the medical work, with which he was, at that time, particularly concerned. Then he goes on to the tasks of the young people, who search with such yearning for a spiritual view of the world. The perennial conflict between the generations, particularly strong at the time, is thoroughly examined. Youthful impetuosity, now emerging to the full rather exuberantly and immaturely amid the strife within the society, is given an orderly field of work in the newly to-be-founded section for the spiritual striving of youth. There follow other brief discussions. Since a new edition of these essays has been long awaited, this seemed the appropriate moment to bring it out as a continuation of the proceedings of the Christmas Foundation Conference. So the next private publication, under the title of The Constitution of the School of Spiritual Science, will contain, in the main, those essays, as well as Dr. Steiner's lectures of 18 and 30 January, and an address given on 3 February. They treat of questions of dividing up the school into sections, and of the special significance of belonging to the class. That's the end of the conclusion by R.Steiner, and the end of Part 20. This is a reading, a short part, Part 21, from the Christmas Conference for the Foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923 to 1924. This is entitled Rudolf Steiner's Words of Welcome to the Social Gathering that was occurred on the 1st of January at 4:30 in the afternoon. These words of welcome were taken down in shorthand by Helene Fink. The gaps at the beginning arose because, as the greeting had not been announced, it took her by surprise. Dr. Steiner. Ellipsis. On the occasion of this painful anniversary, ellipsis, at such a crowded gathering, I imagine that out of this grave mood, the minds and souls of our anthroposophical friends must find one another in personal conversation. We need it, my dear friends. There will always be a need in our society for human being truly to find human being, for heart to find heart, and for soul to find soul. But we need it, particularly here, where we have to gather in this makeshift room, while directly next door stands the remains which so painfully remind us of what we endeavored to have as an external sign for our sacred cause. It seems to me that each one of us must feel the urge this afternoon to find an opportunity in many directions to speak his or her mind about the pain and the sorrow, but also in contrast to fire the development and unfolding of the hope, courage, and strength that we shall need for the future. Though spoken out of heartfelt sorrow, may these words, my dear friends, serve as a starting point for many and varied fruitful exchanges amongst us as anthroposophical friends this afternoon. May it be so. The end of Part 21. Part 22, this is a reading of the Christmas Conference for the Foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923-1924. Notes on the verses. Notes on the verses in the 1985 German edition. In this German edition, the verses are given as Rudolf Steiner spoke them during the Christmas Conference of 1923, as shown by the complete and reliable record in shorthand made by Helene Fink. Previous editions in German contained variations in some of the verses, especially in the rendering of 25 December. This is explained as follows. Rudolf Steiner gave the verses in two versions, both of which are recorded in his own handwriting, and there's facsimiles in this book. The first version was used during the conference. The second version was made for the printed record in the report titled Die Bildung der Allgemeinen Anthroposophischen Gesellschaft durch die Weihnachtstagung 1923, the formation of the General Anthroposophical Society through the Christmas Conference of 1923. In the first number of Was in der Anthroposophischen Gesellschaft vorgeht, Nachrichten für deren Mitglieder, what is happening in the Anthroposophical Society, news for members of 13 January 1924. In this second version, there are certain divergences from the text as spoken during the conference. The most important of these are that the hierarchies are not named, but approached under a general designation, and that the Rosicrucian motto is given in German and not in Latin. The reason which moved Rudolf Steiner to make this alteration was given on a number of occasions by Marie Steiner and recorded by one of her colleagues, Günther Schubert, as follows, quote, She spoke repeatedly about her memory of the great difficulty Rudolf Steiner experienced in reaching the decision to publish the verses of the 1923 laying of the foundation stone. In the end, he toned down the direct approach to the hierarchies by making the salutation more abstract. He wanted this toned-down version to be the one used exclusively within members' circles too, for he said that there was a law attached to esoteric mantrams of such a cultic nature. The force with which they return equal to that with which they are sent forth, and it is therefore necessary to ask oneself whether one will be strong enough to endure this. Close quote. Marie Steiner originally wanted to take this into account when she published this record of the Christmas Foundation meeting. However, it was only possible to, in respect of the words spoken on 25 December, for on 29 December, the call to the hierarchies by name was included in Rudolf Steiner's subsequent discussion of the, quote, rhythms, close quote. The relevant lines were not spoken on the other days. In the present German edition, the verses, including that of 25 December, are given as they were spoken and recorded in the shorthand report. Next small section is called Note on Elemental and Elementary Beings by Richard Seddon. From the 1985 edition of the German text, GA 260, we can see that the manuscript used by Rudolf Steiner at the Foundation address on 25 December 1923 contained the words Das hören die Elementengeister, elemental spirits. During the address, he spoke this in the first 2 verses, but in speaking the 3rd verse he said, "Das hören die Elementargeister," elementary spirits. The latter formulation was both spoken and written on the blackboard on 31 December, and spoken again, twice only, in the concluding address on 1 January. In the less intimate manuscript for printing, we find simply, quote, "Das hören die Geister," close quote. What is at issue here? In the second lecture on 12 April 1909, entitled Spiritual Hierarchies, Rudolf Steiner describes 4 groups of elementary beings, Elementarwesen, the gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders, the, quote, "beings of the elements," close quote, whose redemption depends on man's mode of perception. The beings responsible for the rotation of the earth, that is, from east to west, dependent on man's willing. The beings responsible for the waxing and waning of the moon, dependent on man's feeling. And the beings responsible for summer and winter, the sun's apparent movement between north and south, dependent for their redemption on man's mode of thinking. The last 3 groups were referred to on 4 April 1912 as the spirits of rotation of time, offspring of the first hierarchy, who form the astral body of the earth, whereas the first group form the earth's etheric body. He had previously remarked on 16 May 1908 that spirit is just what the, quote, "very useful," close quote, "beings of this group do not possess." One can only surmise that during his preparation, Rudolf Steiner had chiefly, but not only, in mind the world of the elements, in which the etheric Christ first manifests, but that during the course of the foundation address itself, he felt the need to widen the formulation toward those elementary spirits who govern the relationships between sun and earth in east and west, north and south, and are related to man's willing, feeling, and thinking, rather than his percepts. It is in this interplay between sun and earth that live those offsprings of powers of sun, who form the garment of Michael and prepare the way for Christ, having thus such a direct connection with the Christmas foundation. That's the end of section 22, notes on the verses. This is my attempt at the actual German foundation stone. This is part 23 of the book, The Christmas Conference for the Foundation of the General Anthroposophical Society, 1923-1924. Note, facsimiles of both Rudolf Steiner's handwritten versions, this one, which he prepared for the printer, and the earlier one, which he had with him when he spoke each day during the conference, will be found in the plates. Menschenseele, du lebst in den Gliedern, die dich durch die Raumeswelt in das Geistesmeeres Wesen tragen, über Geist erinnern, in Seelentiefen, wo in waltendem Weltenschöpfer sein, das eigene Ich in Gottes Ich erweset, und du wirst wahrhaft leben im Menschenweltenwesen. Denn es waltet der Vatergeist erhören, in den Weltentiefen Sein erzeugend. Ihr Kräftegeister, lasset aus den Hören erklingen, was in den Tiefen das Echo findet. Diese spricht, aus dem Göttlichen weset die Menschheit. Das hören die Geister in Ost, West, Nord, Süd. Menschen mögen es hören. Menschenseele, du lebst in dem Herzenslungenschlager, der dich durch den Zeitenrhythmus ins eigene Seelenwesens Fühlen leitet, über Geist besinnen, im Seelengleichgewichte, wo die wogenden Welten Werde taten, das eigene Ich dem Welten-Ich vereinen. Und du wirst wahrhaft fühlen, im Menschen Seelen wirken. Denn es waltet der Christuswille im Umkreis, in den Weltenrhythmen Seelen begnadend. Ihr Lichtes Geister, lasset vom Osten befeuern, was durch den Westen sich formet. Diese spricht, in dem Christus wird leben der Tod. Das hören die Geister in Ost, West, Nord, Süd. Menschen mögen es hören. Menschenseele, du lebest im ruhenden Haupte, das dir aus Ewigkeitsgründen die Weltgedanken erschließet, über Geist erschauen, in Gedankenruhe, wo die ewigen Gotterziele, Weltenwesenslicht dem eigenen Ich zu freiem Wollen schenken. Und du wirst wahrhaft denken in Menschen Geistesgründen. Denn es walten des Geistes Weltgedanken, im Weltenwesen Licht erflehend. Ihr Seelengeister, lasset aus den Tiefen erbitten, was in den Höhen erhöret wird. Diese spricht, in des Geistes Weltgedanken erwachet die Seele. Das hören die Geister in Ost, West, Nord, Süd. Menschen mögen es hören. In der Zeitenwende trat das Weltengeisteslicht in den irdischen Wesenstrom. Nachtdunkel hatte ausgewaltet, taghelles Licht erstrahlte in Menschenseelen. Licht, das erwärmet die armen Hirtenherzen. Licht, das erleuchtet die weißen Königshäupter. Göttliches Licht, Christussonne, erwärme unsere Herzen, erleuchte unsere Häupter, dass gut werde, was wir aus Herzen gründen, was wir aus Häuptern führen wollen. End of the German Foundation Stone Meditation. Soul of man, thou livest in the limbs which bear thee through the world of space into the ocean being of the spirit. Practice spirit recollection in depths of soul, where in the wielding world creator life thine own eye comes to being within the eye of God. Then in the all-world being of man thou wilt truly live. For the Father Spirit of the heights holds sway in depths of worlds, begetting life. Spirits of strength, let there ring out from the heights what in the depths is echoed, speaking. From God mankind has being. The spirits hear it in east and west and north and south. May human beings hear it. Soul of man, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, which leads thee through the rhythmic tides of time into the feeling of thine own soul being. Practice spirit mindfulness in balance of the soul, where the surging deeds of the world's becoming do thine own eye unite unto the eye of the world. Then mid the weaving of the soul of man thou wilt truly feel. For the Christ will in the encircling round hold sway, in the rhythms of the worlds, blessing the soul. Spirits of light, that to be fired from the east, what through the west is formed speaking. In Christ, death becomes life. The spirits hear it in east and west and north and south. May human beings hear it. Soul of man, thou livest in the resting head, which from the ground of the eternal opens to thee the thoughts of worlds. Practice spirit vision in quietness of thought, where the eternal aims of God's world being's light on thine own eye bestow for thy free willing. Then from the ground of the Spirit in man thou wilt truly think. For the Spirit's universal thoughts hold sway in the being of all worlds, craving for light. Spirits of soul, may there be prayed in the depths what from the heights is answered speaking. In the Spirit's universal thoughts, the soul awakens. The spirits hear it in east and west and north and south. May human beings hear it. At the turning point of time, the spirit light of the world entered the stream of earthly being. Darkness of night had held its sway. Day, radiant light, poured into the souls of men. Light that gives warmth to simple shepherds' hearts. Light that enlightens the wise heads of kings. O light divine, O Son of Christ, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads, that good may become what from our hearts we would found, and from our heads direct with single purpose.